Hey gang, it's Jeff here with missionmusician.com, and today I want to talk about analog emulation, and I want to talk about it in two different phases. I want to talk about it in creating an analog emulation recording chain, and then I want to talk about it in mixing. And they're two separate things. So what's the big deal about analog emulation? Well, if you think about all of the iconic gear in the music industry, the 1176 comes to mind, the Neve board comes to mind, the Studer tape machine comes to mind. These are all legendary pieces of gear. People loved using this gear because of a certain vibe it added, a certain color it added, an energy it added to tracks. And that is why people love analog gear, because it adds something pleasing through harmonics, distortion, whatever. It adds something pleasing to the sound, which is why a lot of people didn't like digital recording when it first came out. And as a result of that, you have all these software companies making emulations of these legendary pieces of gear. And this is 2016, and they have gotten really, really close here lately to emulating these pretty dead on. Now, I'm not one of those nerdy type of people who get into, is it exactly, and I'm not trying to insult anybody here. I actually respect those people who do all those tests on the hardware versus software, but I don't get into that kind of stuff. All right, and I'm sorry, I wasn't calling you nerds. I just mean that I'm not smart enough to get into that kind of stuff. Let me put it that way. All I care about is, does it make my mix sound better? Does it help me mix? And these versions that are out now definitely help, definitely add color, definitely add vibe, and breathe life into a mix. So I want to show you how you can do it in the recording phase. And I'm not talking about tracking through these plugins, because the latency would just be awful. At least it is on Windows 7 running Pro Tools 12.4. It's not really usable. So how do we do it? What's the solution to that? If we can't track through it, how do we do it? Well, we can render it to the file as soon as the file's recorded. So I got a vocal here that I'm going to play in just a second that was recorded through a Neumann U87 into an Avalon 737 channel strip. And the vocal sounds good on its own, but I want to give it some vibe and some character. And I'm going to use analog emulation to do that before I even think about mixing any of this song. So I would do this right after I track the vocal, or right after I track the guitar, or after the musicians left for the day. I would go through and just start rendering these to the files, okay, to give that analog vibe. And when we think about an analog recording chain, in order to duplicate it, we have to know what happens, where what goes to what. So let's use a singer, for example. There'll be a mic in front of the singer. The cable will run to a preamp, either an inboard preamp from the board or an outboard preamp, and then it'll run through the board to an EQ, to a compressor, and that compressor can be inboard or outboard, and then it'll run out to a tape machine. So that is what we want to try to duplicate: a preamp, a console, an EQ, and a compressor. Now, when I record, and I use EQ and compression when I record, I don't do drastic moves, okay? I try to get the best mic placement I can, and then if I need to cut a little bit, I'll cut a little bit. For example, in this vocal, there's a little bit of nasal frequency at 1.2 kilohertz, and I just cut 1.5 dB out, and there's a little mud at 430, and I just cut 2.5 dB out, and I rolled the high pass filter up. Okay? So, and the other beautiful thing about using something like Slate's VMR is you can use different emulations inside, the VMR rack. So, for example, I have an FG76 run to a Brit N, and then using the what is it? The FGS EQ and the FG116 compressor. All right, so you can really change it up here. All right, so let me play you just a little bit of this vocal, and I'll play a line, and then I'll bring this in, and you can kind of hear what it's doing. And I'm going to tell you up front that it is subtle, but that's the way I want it. It's subtle, but it's doing its thing. And when you add that little subtleness up over 20 or 30 tracks, it really adds up. So let's take a listen here.
She was a doll, she was a lady. She was a blessing from above. She wanted everything, and so did I. I couldn't do it all alone.
All right, so it's sounding warmer to me. It's adding a little bit of mids, and that could be because I backed out the lower mids, that the upper mids sound a little bit clearer. So let's add in a tape machine. And so we would run from the desk to a 2-inch tape machine to record it. Okay? Now in mixing, and we're still talking about recording here, but in mixing, it comes from the 2-inch tape into the desk. But when we're in tracking phase, it goes from the desk to record to the 2-inch tape. Hope that makes sense. All right, so let's add this in.
She was a doll, she was a lady. She was a blessing from above. She wanted everything, and so did I. I couldn't do it all alone.
So that sounds really good to me. Let's turn both of these off, and I'll turn them on.
She was a doll, she was a lady. She was a blessing from above. She wanted everything, and so did I. I couldn't do it all alone.
All right, so that sounds like a very well recorded vocal that has some vibe to it. So what I would do in Pro Tools is right-click this, and what I would normally do is commit up to this insert, but for now I'm going to freeze up to this insert, and it's going to take a few seconds here to render it to the file. All right, so now I want to talk about analog emulation and mixing. So it's coming from the tape machine, which we've already rendered the tape machine onto our track. So it's like it's playing through the tape machine, and it's coming into VMR. So it comes from the tape machine into the console. Again, I'm using Brit N, then into an EQ, then into a compressor, and then we can add, saturation, or, we can put revival in there if we wanted, or whatever. But this would be the basic emulation chain right here for mixing. Because if you think about it, you have a board, you have an EQ, and you have compression on the board. Okay, so let's see, what did I do here? I pulled some out at 785, about 2.5 dB. Put a little touch of high end in there, and this isn't even on, so I'm just going to turn that off, and let's take a listen.
She was a doll, she was a lady. She was a blessing from above. She wanted everything, and so did I. couldn't do it all alone.
All right. So that is how I would emulate a recording chain, and then how I would emulate a mixing chain. Again, you can switch out, you can switch, maybe you want to mix it on a API or a different Neve, you can certainly do that, put it on the RC tube, whatever. That's the beauty of having all these different emulations, is we can get different flavors, different colors, and get a different tone. All right, so hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. I love using analog emulation for just about everything. Oh, man, I almost wrapped up without mentioning this. So, sorry about that. The very last thing you want to do, and I always put this on my mix bus to mix through it, meaning I leave it on while I mix, before I turn it on before I even start mixing, is another instance of virtual tape machine set to 1/2-inch 2-track. So this is meant to emulate mixing the mix down to a 1/2-inch 2-track master. Okay, so that is what I do. I just turn this on and let's listen.
She was a doll, she was a lady.
Actually, what I want to do is I'm going to unfreeze these and we'll bypass everything and listen to it. All right, so let's bypass these. There we go. All right, so let's listen, and I'll bring all these in.
She was a doll, she was a lady. She was a blessing from above. She wanted everything, and so did I. I couldn't do it all alone. I wanted her to have the finest things. She looked good in diamonds and pearls.
All right, so that sounds great to me. May have to do some adjusting in the mix, which is probably why I definitely wouldn't mix the vocal and solo. I'm just doing demonstration here. But you can see the vibe and the color and the life that these emulations bring to just the vocal track, and imagine doing that over another 18 to 24 tracks. It's really gonna add up. So again, hope you like this video. Subscribe if you like these type of videos. I tend to shoot a lot of these, and I will see you soon in more videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye bye.